Peace and blessings, family. This is Adam Jackson. I am a part of Leaders of a Beautiful Struggle. We're a grassroots think tank here in Baltimore City. And I actually wanted to record this message to Baltimore City residents who are looking to protest and express their rage at the murders of George Floyd and Sister Breonna Taylor, and the host of black people who have been unjustly murdered by Baltimore, not by Baltimore City Police, but by police. And I just want to make sure that this message goes to folks who are actually going to be out in the streets doing protesting, which either today or in the near future. It's extremely important that we understand the stakes that are at play, and that people aren't putting their lives in danger for no reason. And so a few things I want you to consider. I made this post on our page, so there's an announcement that has a list of things to consider, but I want to tell you directly because as someone who is directly involved with the Baltimore uprising, who saw a lot of protests occur and saw a lot of nonsense happen and saw a lot of things that had nothing to do with justice end up happening during that time, I just want to make sure that we can help prevent a lot of those things happening now. So first thing I want you to consider is that you have to know who the leaders of these protests and marches are. A lot of people think that protests and marches are just sporadic and spontaneous. And the fact of the matter is that there are people oftentimes who are putting these things together who are not from our community, haven't done anything in our community, and are using this as an opportunity to actually create more platform for themselves and to get more notoriety for themselves. So you have to know the difference between people who are doing that and actually organize a local leader who's organizing because they want to make something happen, or just expressing their rage at the incidents that have occurred. And so you need to know the difference as a resident, because what will happen is that you'll be caught up following people who will put your life at risk, trying to confront police officers and just doing things because they want to. And they'll do that just in exchange for clout, to get some follows on social media, to get their little media moment. And that's not what this is about. It doesn't help black people. It doesn't help our community to overcome police brutality, state-sponsored violence, structural racism, and white supremacy by putting our lives at risk without actually knowing the stakes at play. And you can't afford to follow people who may not have those things in mind. And so if you're ever at a protest and you don't know who's leading it, look at who's up front, ask them who's leading it. If you can't find somebody who can tell you who's leading it, then that's not, and you can't conclude that it is somebody from community that's leading that protest, then you probably shouldn't be a part of it. And I'm not saying that you shouldn't protest. You should protest. You should express your rage. We all should as black people. But never get caught up with people who are just doing it for clout and for notoriety. Secondly, it's pretty simple. You are more important than property, meaning that people are more important than property. So if you see that there's a building on fire, if you see anything that is dangerous and involves property damage, make sure that the protesters, yourself, and bystanders are safe, okay? Because what happened during the Baltimore uprising is that there were a lot of people trying to save property, focusing on trying to put water out of the CVS, when in reality, the people who are actually living in this community are the ones who are the most important. So make sure that you are safe, that your friends and family are safe, make sure that any bystanders are safe and fellow protesters are safe. That's simple. Third thing, any demonstration or action in Baltimore City being led by a white institution or white people was illegitimate. Do not follow white people that are even if they talk a good game, even if they say, we're about black liberation too, we want to be your ally, it's illegitimate. You should be suspicious of any black people that are trying to get you to follow any white organization to protest police brutality. There are lots of ways that white people can show their solidarity against police brutality and against structural racism and white supremacy, but do not follow these white folks down the street with their bullhorns talking about police brutality, because ultimately it should be black people of and from this community leading these marches and leading these demonstrations. So do not follow behind them. And anything that's like that, you should automatically assume it's illegitimate. And if you can't find out who's leading it that's black, you should get out of there, okay? Last thing is that I know that a lot of us have been stuck in the house. A lot of us have been stuck, thinking about COVID-19. A lot of people have wanted to demonstrate and haven't because they've had concerns about the public health emergency with COVID-19. Look, I'm here to tell you, you do not have to be pressured to go out into the street and risk your health and safety for that. Okay, there's lots of ways at this moment, as I'm speaking, that you can support a lot of work that is happening in our community on these issues of police brutality. Okay, you don't have to go out and do that right now, especially, and there's lots of people who have other considerations. There's people who who aren't just alone and single and living in a home and can go do that. There are people with children and families and other things that they have to think about. And if I'm describing you, then you should support a local black organization in Baltimore that's doing work. It's not just LBS. There are dozens and dozens and dozens of black people doing work in our community every day that could use some money, some volunteer support, or other kinds of support that can really move the needle on ending and destroying structural racism and white supremacy and building black power in our community. So there are lots of ways you can do that. Do not feel pressure. Don't feel bad. Do not grieve not being a part of the protest, because that's not what's actually, the protests are important, but ultimately it's a marathon. We have to actually figure out how we're going to destroy this system of white supremacy and racism, okay? And one last thing that I'll mention before I go off is that I've been informed earlier that Speaker Adrian Jones has actually announced a new legislative committee that's going to be exploring issues around police reform and criminal justice reform in general. And while that's good, and we appreciate Speaker Jones actually taking the effort and initiative on doing that, the issue is that Democrats will constantly say how they release a statement saying they feel our pain, they feel our suffering, they want to be in solidarity with us. But for the past 5 years in Maryland, we have not been able to get substantive criminal justice reform legislation passed through our General Assembly, because that's how a lot of this stuff changes with police accountability. We have to actually go to these positions of power. We have to go to Annapolis. We have to change these structures by using the law. And when they don't do it, we force them to do it. And unfortunately, this year, even though we felt like we were going to make headway doing that, what ended up happening is that COVID-19 ended session early. And when we were in the middle of pushing criminal justice reform legislation. So I challenge any Democrat that's watching this video who calls themselves a supporter of black people, that calls themselves a supporter of our community, that says they want to actually see transformative change, that says they're devastated at the murder of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and Ahmaud Arbery and any other black person that's either been killed by a vigilante or a police officer. If you're a Democrat and you watching this video, then I challenge you and your colleagues in the Maryland General Assembly to support progressive legislation that will actually hold police accountable, that will actually make civilians have more oversight over our processes as it relates to policing. And the issue is that there's no one actually talking about that now, because we're all in the midst of this, and everyone wants to clout chase and post and talk about standing in solidarity with our community. The best way you can stand in solidarity, Democrats, is that you should vote and support legislation that has more civilian oversight over police. There's no reason why a black person can't end up just like Brother George or Sister Breonna tomorrow, based on the current system. The Gun Trace Task Force showed rampant police corruption. The DOJ report of 2016 showed rampant police corruption, and we still have not been able to get substantive changes in the criminal justice system, even though we had an uprising in 2015. So you can really save all of your platitudes. 2021 is going to come, and you're going to be required to actually hold your colleagues accountable for not supporting legislation that holds police accountable and that puts residents and civilians at the center of the process for holding police accountable. So if you're not interested in doing that, then save all your platitudes. Again, if you're just tuning into this, if you're going to protest, I've offered 4 different things. 1, know the leaders of the people you're following. Know the people you're following. Don't follow blindly into a protest. Ask who's leading it. Ask who called it. Ask who's leading the chants up front. Ask where you're going, and ask what the point is, and ask what our demands are. If you don't know any of those things, then you shouldn't be following behind them. You wouldn't do that in normal life. You shouldn't do that in a protest either. Secondly, any action that is being led in Baltimore by white people or a white institution is illegitimate, and you should be very suspicious of any black people who are either sponsored by these white folks or are heavily supported by white folks. If you can't identify a grassroots leader that are part of these actions, again, I highly recommend that you do not follow behind them or you hold them accountable. Okay? Third, people are more important than property. Make sure that you protect yourself, your colleagues, protesters, and bystanders as you see these protests happening, okay? Because if there's a building on fire or if there's anything else happening where property is being damaged, do not risk your life to save a piece of property. Make sure that the people around you are safe, and make sure you are safe. And lastly, the one thing that you can do to support this issue around stopping police brutality is to support black organizations that are already working on those issues today. I know COVID-19 has had a lot of us hemmed up in the house. A lot of us feel like that we're powerless. A lot of us feel like that we can't do anything right now. And we need to understand that there's plenty that we can do. We just need to make sure that we're constantly supporting Black institutions and Black organizations and Black leadership that are working to transform these issues from the inside out. So again, those are the things that we have to focus on. And we need to make sure that come 2021, after this public health emergency, that we hold these Democrats accountable at the state level that say they support our community, but don't actually put forward legislation that transforms the accountability system for law enforcement. Okay? All right. Now, if you have any questions about anything I said, send us an email, info@lbsbaltimore.com. You can contact me directly, adam@lbsbaltimore.com. And if you have any issues, any questions about legislation, any of that stuff, you can hit us up. But if you have any other questions about people that are doing different work around the city, feel free to hit me up or look for them themselves. Talk to your friends, talk to your colleagues. There are people today that you can support. All right? Peace. Stay Black. Stay powerful. I'll talk to y'all later. All right.